स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय कृष्णाय ते नमः। Life has meaning, says Browning, and to find its meaning is my meat and drink. That is the aim of my life. So much of our lives is meaningless, a self-cancelling vacillation and futility. We strive with the chaos about us and within, but we would believe all the while that there is something vital and significant in us. Could we but decipher our own souls? So, this is what the great scholar and writer Will Durant says about the importance of philosophy. That finding a meaning to life, how to better deal with the chaos around us. Then he says, we want to seize the value and perspective of passing things, and so to pull ourselves up out of the maelstrom of daily circumstance. We want to know that the little things are little and the big things big before it is too late. We want to see things now as they will seem forever in the light of eternity. So, such pregnant words that seeing things in their correct perspective, recognize what is passing, what will pass, and recognize what is really important, what is eternal. Then he continues, we want to learn to laugh in the face of the inevitable, to smile even at the looming of death, because the desire to be immortal lies in each one of us. That's why this happens. Then he says, we want to be whole, to coordinate our energies by criticizing and harmonizing our desires. For coordinated energy is the last word in ethics and politics, and perhaps in logic and metaphysics too. To be a philosopher, says Thoreau, is not merely to have subtle thoughts, nor even to found a school of philosophy, but so to love wisdom as to live according to its dictates a life of simplicity, independence, magnanimity, and trust. Such wonderful words, and it tells us what actually philosophy is about, that it our lives should be guided by it. That is the main thing. Our lives should be transformed by our seeking what is really of importance in this life and how to channelize our lives in that direction. Then he continues, we may be sure that if we can but find wisdom, all things else will be added unto us. Seek first the good things of the mind, and the rest will either be supplied or its loss will not be felt. truth will not make us rich, but it will make us free. So, absolutely wonderful way of telling us what philosophy is all about. So, I've just given you a glimpse of the writings of the great scholar Will Durant, an absolute master of English, and the way he could present his thoughts is absolutely unbelievable. His prose is also just like poetry. So, this is what is philosophy all about. And by now, we have a fairly good idea of Indian philosophy. We have studied the different schools, and also we have studied the psychology of Patanjali. So now we can venture a little into Western philosophy. Just we can start today, then let's see where this journey will lead us. It is a fascinating journey. So, first, about the source books which I have used in today's discussion. First and foremost, of course, that wonderful book, The Story of Philosophy by Will Durant. How that person has made such a dry subject so interesting. Without reading that book, we can never even imagine. Then, of course, that landmark publication, that wonderful book by Bertrand Russell, which is A History of the Western Philosophy. And apart from this, I've consulted many websites and some other books also. So, when we start our study of Western philosophy, we have to first travel to another country. We will have to travel to that country which is considered the cradle of Western civilization. It is said to be the birthplace of democracy, Western philosophy, Western literature, political science, major scientific and mathematical principles, theater, architecture, and of course also the Olympic Games. Yeah, so we have to travel to Greece, that great land. Of course, among all these subjects, we are only concerned with philosophy today. And it is interesting to note that this word itself comes from Greek. Yeah, it is composed of the Greek word philos, meaning love of, and Sophia, meaning wisdom. So, what is philosophy? It is love of wisdom, knowing. Not only temporal knowledge is meant, it is wisdom, the word we should remember. Real knowledge which changes our lives for the better. And we will start our study right at the beginning from the ancient Greek philosophers who opened the doors to a particular way of thinking that provided the roots for the whole of the Western intellectual tradition. It's not a small thing. It all started here. And in these philosophers, we see an explicit preference for the life of reason and rational thought. Life governed by rational thought, free of superstitions. So, first I will just share the map of Greece. So the map is in front of you. We all know. I'm showing the map for two reasons. One is that I will share, you can see the shape of the country. We will see how beautifully Will Durant describes this. And we also need to see the location of two cities which are very important for our discussion. That is, one is Athens, we all know, and the other is a city-state in ancient Greek which is called Sparta. So this is the map, and see how beautifully Will Durant describes this country. He says, if you look at a map of Europe, you will observe that Greece is a skeleton-like hand stretching its crooked fingers out into the Mediterranean Sea. South of it lies the great island of Crete, from which those grasping fingers captured in the second millennium before Christ the beginnings of civilization and culture. To the east lies Asia Minor, quiet now but throbbing in pre-Platonic days with industry, commerce and speculation. To the west, Italy stands like a leaning tower in the sea, and Sicily and Spain, each in those days with thriving Greek colonies. And at the end, the pillars of Hercules, which we call Gibraltar, that somber portal through which not many an ancient mariner dared to pass. See how beautifully he describes. His language is simply superb. And for our study, we need to know a little about two cities of ancient Greece, which are Athens and Sparta. So it is actually, the spelling is Sparta, but it is pronounced, the T is pronounced like D, so it is pronounced Sparta. And I will just show you the relative positions of Athens and Sparta. Here you can see. So we will see how Sparta is very important for our study today. We have to go back to those times, roughly 6th century BC. So we have seen from the map the position of Athens. It is the farthest east of the larger cities of Greece, and it was favorably placed to be the door through which the Greeks passed out to the busy cities of Asia Minor, and through which those elder cities sent their luxuries and their culture to Greece at that time. So Athens had an admirable port, and it had a great maritime fleet also. And Sparta, as we have seen now, was a prominent city-state in ancient Greece. Around 650 BC, it rose to become the dominant military land power in the whole country. Now what happened was, around 490 to 470 BC, there was a war because Persia attacked Greece, not once but twice. So Sparta and Athens, which were the most well equipped to deal with such a calamity, they joined their forces. Because why I say joined their forces, at one time Sparta and Athens were also fighting with each other. In those days, practically everybody was fighting everybody else, at the least instance there used to be a war or something. But now, when they faced a common enemy, Sparta and Athens joined their forces and fought off the effort of the Persians to turn Greece into a colony of the Asiatic Empire. So Persia attacked twice, and the second Persian invasion of Greece was a major event. It had great significance in European history. A large number of historians hold that had Greece been conquered by Persia at that time, the ancient Greek culture that lies at the basis of Western civilization would never have developed, because a whole different culture would have conquered Greece, and naturally, the ruler decides, takes all the decisions of the state. So this was a very great event, and fortunately, Greek and Sparta, when they joined forces, they were a very powerful force and they defeated the Persians. So in that war, Sparta provided the army and Athens the navy. And after the war was over, Athens turns her navy into a merchant fleet. So what to do with all those ships which were used in the war? You can't, there's no need to sink them. So turned those ships into merchant fleet. And that's why it became one of the greatest trading cities of the ancient world. It also became a busy mart and port and the meeting place of many races of men of diverse cults and customs. So many people came because trade flourished. So what happened then? Again, I will quote the great Will Durant, how beautifully expresses the growth of wealth. Wealth came, you see, the nation prospered. Trading was there, people were coming from all countries. The growth of wealth brought the leisure and security, which are the prerequisite of research and speculation. If the mind is to be free to do research and speculation, there should be the means. Country should be at peace and they should have the wealth. So now men asked the stars not only for guidance on the seas, but as well for an answer to the riddles of the universe. So first they were only concerned with whether our ships will pass safely and all, just with the mundane things. But now they had the leisure. So they asked the stars not only for guidance on the seas, but also sought from them the answer to the riddles of the whole universe. And we should note that the first Greek philosophers were astronomers also. Proud of their achievements, says Aristotle, men pushed farther afield after the Persian wars. They took all knowledge for their province and sought ever wider studies. The brain now flourished. Men grew bold enough to attempt natural explanations of processes and events which were earlier attributed to supernatural agencies and powers. This god is doing that, that god is doing that. Greek mythology is full of gods, hundreds of gods. So all the natural phenomenon which they used to have a mythological explanation, now they said no, that is not enough. We have to go deep. We have to find why this happens, why eclipse happen, why there is rain, why there are earthquakes. So it started from there. That is why the early Greek philosophers are called naturalists. So men grew bold enough to attempt natural explanations of processes and events before attributed to supernatural agencies and powers, and magic and ritual slowly gave way to science and control, and philosophy began. It's just such beautiful language. I mean, I enjoyed so much, that's why preparing for this. So now we have seen this is about Athens and Sparta, and the first philosophers were born or either born or they grew up in a city called Miletus. So in the 6th century BC, Miletus was the site of origin of the Greek philosophical and scientific traditions. So Miletus was a very important city then, but now it is in Turkey. So the first philosopher, so to say, his name was Thales. It is Thales, but it is pronounced Thales. So Thales belonged to Miletus, and he was followed by Anaximander and Anaximenes. We will all see those names. We'll learn about them. So when these three began to speculate about the material constitution of the world, they were all based in Miletus. Now Miletus is in Turkey. So there at the beginning of the 6th century, industry and trade reached their peak. And the growing wealth of Miletus flowed forth in literature, philosophy, and art. So at this particular time, it was the richest city of the Greek world, Miletus. In fact, the wealth and luxury of the city became a proverb and a scandal throughout Greece. That was the situation. So I'll just show you where Miletus is. So here you can see to the left there is a city, Miletus. So our journey starts here. Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. So slowly these names will become familiar to us. So philosophy began, and about Miletus especially, Will Durant says, we have seen how wealthy it was. Now, with wealth comes culture generally. If wealth is not misused, it gives rise to a very high degree of culture. So an aristocracy of culture was growing up in Miletus, in which freedom of thought was tolerated because only a small minority could read. No powerful priesthood, no ancient and inspired text limited men's thinking. Freedom of thought was given expression. Even the Homeric poems, Homer, you know, the Iliad and Odyssey was written. So even the Homeric poems, which were to become in some sense the Bible of the Greeks, had hardly yet taken a definite form. So here for the first time, thought became secular and sought rational and consistent answers to the problems of the world and man. This is philosophy all about, to search for rational and consistent answers to the problems which we face. So it was in this stimulating environment that Greece first developed two of its most characteristic gifts to the world, science and philosophy. So at first, this philosophy was physical. We first deal with matter because that is what we see. And slowly, we see that that is not the end. Then matter leads to spirit. So first, here also this philosophy was physical. It looked out upon the material world and asked what was the final and irreducible constituent of things. The natural termination of this line of thought was the materialism of Democritus. He was a philosopher 460 to 360 BC. Slowly, when we study, all these names will become familiar to us. So, according to him, in reality, there is nothing but atoms and space in the universe. Democritus is primarily remembered today for his formulation of an atomic theory of the universe. In those ancient times, just imagine when they had nothing, no microscope, nothing. Just thinking in this line, it was how revolutionary. But the most characteristic and fertile developments of Greek philosophy took form with sophists, as they are called. It is Sophist, sophist. So who were the sophists? They were teachers in ancient Greece in the 4th and 5th centuries BC. Sophists specialized in one or more subject areas such as philosophy, rhetoric, music, athletics, and mathematics. They taught virtue or excellence, to excel in your field, predominantly to young statesmen and nobility. So, who were the sophists? Regarding them, Will Durant says they were the traveling teachers of wisdom. They went from place to place, who looked within upon their own thought and nature rather than out upon the world of things. So, with them, the mind of the Greeks slowly started turning inside, looking within instead of always looking outside. They were clever men and many of them were profound. There is hardly a problem or a solution in our current philosophy of mind and conduct which they did not realize and discuss even in those times. They asked questions about everything and stood unafraid in the presence of religious and political taboos. They were not afraid to ask the why and what of everything. And Athens became the center of the activity of these sophists. They thrived there. It is such a big city, people are coming due to the city's freedom of speech and its wealth of resources. So, why all this background? Because Socrates, who is credited as the founder of Western philosophy, has been classified as a sophist by many. That is why we need to know who the sophists were. So, although Socrates is recognized as the founder of Western philosophy, but before studying him, the time of Socrates is 470 to 399 BC. 470 to 399 BC. But before studying Socrates, to understand his contribution better, let us first introduce ourselves to the philosophers who came before him. They were known as the pre-Socratics, group of early Greek philosophers. So naturally there are many, but we need to know just about some important ones, maybe 5 or 6. Most of them were born before Socrates, and their attention to questions about the origin and nature of the physical world has led to their being called cosmologists or naturalists. Because in them, philosophy was combined with the study of nature as well as the study of the planets and all stars of astronomy. So pre-Socratic thought marks a decisive turn away from mythological accounts. So now from that time, people turned away from mythology or blind belief. Now they started asking the how and why of everything. So they turned from mythological accounts towards rational explanations of the cosmos. Indeed, some pre-Socratics openly criticize and ridicule traditional Greek mythology, while others simply explain the world and its causes in material terms. That is not to say that they abandoned belief in gods or things sacred. It is not that. It is not that they turned into atheists. But there is a definite turning away from attributing causes of material events to gods. That they decline to do. That the eclipse is caused by some god, in Hindu mythology that Rahu grasps. So all these, they said, yes, it's okay for mythology, but it is not the rational explanation. So the foundation of pre-Socratic thought is the preference and esteem given to rational thought over mythologizing, as it is called. This movement towards rationality and argumentation would pave the way for the course of Western thought. This is the thing. So, the first philosopher we will study is Thales of Miletus. Because it is said that Western philosophy began with this person. So he is very, very important and it is very interesting. His thoughts were revolutionary and some amusing anecdotes also we will see. So nothing certain is known about the dates, like when was Thales born, but it is conjectured that he was born about 640 BC. 640 BC, so you can compare with Socrates, 470 BC. So about 200 years before Socrates. So as we have seen, he was a native of Miletus, a flourishing commercial city. And he had much of his education, it is said, in Egypt and the Near East. So here we see the transit of culture from East to West. He learnt in the East and came to the West. So he was a very simple man, as philosophers are. He appears to have engaged in business and earning a living only so far as to provide himself with the ordinary necessities of life. That is why he was you can say, a saintly person in that sense. And the rest of the time he gave himself to study, which the absorbed devotion suggested by the tale of his falling into a ditch while watching the stars. So he was so absorbed in his mind was always one of those things, you see. So it is said that he was observing and did not notice anything and fell into a ditch. So to him, tradition unanimously ascribed the introduction of mathematical and astronomical science into Greece. What a great thing to a person to tell that he introduced mathematical and astronomical science into Greece. Just what a compliment it is. And it is said that in Egypt, he was the first to calculate the height of the pyramids. And how did he do it? Such an ingenious but simple way. How to calculate the height of such a huge structure? So what did he do? Just sees intelligence. He stood in sunlight and waited for the exact time when his shadow would be equal to his height. Just see the ingenuity. So if the shadow is equal to my height, my shadow, then at that time, the shadow of the pyramid will also be equal to its height. That is how he measured the height of the pyramid. And afterwards, he pursued the fascinatingly logical study of geometry as a deductive science and demonstrated several of the theorems later collected by Euclid. Euclid, you are, I think, familiar with the name. So, as these theorems founded Greek geometry, so his studies of astronomy established that science for Western civilization and disentangled it from its Oriental associations with astrology. He made several minor observations and at that time startled everybody by successfully predicting an eclipse of the sun. He told everybody that the eclipse would take place at this date and this time. So that date is certain. And from that date, actually, we guess about when he was born, etc. So that date was 28th May 585 BC. And some of his very interesting propositions, he said the world, our earth, was a hemisphere resting on an endless expanse of water. Where is the earth resting? There has to be some resting place of everything. So he said there is a huge infinite expanse of water and the earth is resting upon it. How? He said the earth is a flat disk floating on the flat side of the interior of this hemisphere in which there is an endless expanse of water. So, and another of his interesting propositions was that he made water the first principle of all things. He says that everything comes from water. So water he made the first principle of all things, the original form and their final destiny also. He said that everything will go back to water. So there are many reasons he could have come at this conclusion. So one guess is by Aristotle. So Aristotle says that he had come to this opinion from observing that the nutriment of everything is moist and that the seeds of everything have a moist nature and that from which everything is generated is always its first principle. So just guessing. Or perhaps he believed that water was the most primitive or fundamental of the three forms, gas, liquid and solid, into which theoretically all substances may be changed. So what is the importance of this? He is telling that water is the source of everything. Everything comes from water and goes back to water. What is the significance of this thought? The significance is not in reducing all things to water, but in reducing all things to one. He was the first who proposed that everything in the universe comes from a single substance. That itself is revolutionary. How could anyone think that? Because we see hundreds and thousands and millions of things. Who could imagine that everything will come from one substance? So here was the first monism in recorded history. Recorded history means Western history, mind you. We had reached this many, many years ago, Indians. And another great, because it is very interesting to compare, now that we have some idea of Indian philosophy, it is very interesting to compare his conclusions with Indian philosophy. So another great proposition he said, wonderful, he said that there is nothing which is non-living. We have two things, in Jada Chetana, that is, one is conscious and one is not conscious. But he said there is nothing which is non-living. He said every particle of the world is alive and that matter and life are inseparable and one. See how he is going towards that unity. Then he said there is an immortal soul in plants and metals as well as in animals and men. So that soul is the vital power which changes form but which never dies. Thales was wont to say that there is no essential difference between the living and the dead. So when he said this, there is no essential difference between the living and the dead, then someone asked him that why he chose to live instead of die then. Then his reply was, because there is no difference. So he was really a very interesting personality, and he was so much honored that he received by common consent the title of Sophos or Saint. And when Greece came to name its 7 wise men, it placed Thales first among them. So in the life of Christ, we read that 7 wise men came to him when he took birth. 7 or 3? 3 wise men, sorry. So maybe they are connected, we don't know. So now this is about his very, in a brief way we have discussed that some of his most important conclusions, and we see how they are so much in line with our Advaita philosophy also, tracing everything back to one substance. So just some his wisdom and wit, you can see some question and answers have come down. That he was asked some questions and how he answered. So he was asked what was very difficult. What is the thing which is the most difficult in the world? He said, to know yourself. See, at that time he could realize, I mean, he must have some sort of vision. Otherwise, how could he say this thing? In that materialistic atmosphere. Then he said, what was the easiest thing in the world? He said, to give advice. He was asked, what is God? See his reply. He said, that which has neither beginning nor end. So at that time he had that, concept of infinity. Then, wonderful answer another, he was asked how men might live most virtuously and justly, how we should live in the world. He said, if we never do ourselves what we blame in others. So really, if we try to follow our own words, I mean, try to base our life, so very It's a very interesting personality. And to end, I will share a very interesting story about him. So this is true. Actually, it was told by Aristotle later because Thales, we don't have any of his original writings or, no biography or anything. So, as most saintly people, Thales was just satisfied with plain food and clothing, so naturally he never grew to be a rich man. So, there is one story about him told by Aristotle in his Politics. There's a writing by Aristotle. So, Thales was often reproached for his poverty. People will, maybe they would say, "Oh, what has your philosophy given you? All these rags and all these things." Hmm. So they were used to say, then what is the use if philosophy can't give us riches? That is how men think. So when they used to make fun of him, he thought, okay, I'll show you people. So according to that story, he knew by his skill of the stars, placement of the stars. So when it was winter there, he could see the stars even in winter, and he knew that there would be a great harvest of olives in the coming year. Somehow he could make out, he could deduce that. So, what did he do with the little money in hand he had? He gave deposits for the use of all the olive presses in Miletus. All the olive presses he booked, or some, they must have some system. He took on a lease or something. At that time, nobody required those things. So he got them at a very low price. And when the harvest time came, his prediction came true. So many olives. Now people want presses, to squeeze out or whatever they want to do. So all the presses were wanted, and all of a sudden, so now everybody had to come to him. Now he rented those presses at whatever place he liked. He was the boss. So he made a large quantity of money. So thus he showed the world that philosophers can easily be rich also if they like, but that their ambition is of a different sort. They don't give value to those riches. That is why they never strive in that direction. So this much about the origin, and of course those who you have the leisure, you can just go through that book. It is simply wonderful. The way he has made philosophy so alive and interesting, Will Durant. Most of the things which I have quoted are from his book, and of course some from other places also. So now Thales had some disciples. So we will try to have at least one more discussion, if not two, on the pre-Socratic philosophers. There were many, but we will deal with the most important. One more whose ideas were as revolutionary as Thales was, Anaximander. Then there was Anaximenes, Xenophanes. Then there was one Heraclides, and of course there was the great Pythagoras, about whom we know from his famous theorem. Yeah. So next time when we discuss this topic, we will see the wonderful discoveries, we can say, or the wonderful philosophies of the disciples of Thales. The primary disciple, the most important, is Anaximander. So before ending, I will just, in a most important achievements of Thales, I will share in point form, and then also show a bust. Actually, there's a statue from which it is said that nobody really knows what they look like. So just we can see a sculptured sort of thing. So first I will just share the very important achievements of Thales. So here you can see in point form Thales of Miletus 620 to 545 BC. Of course, this is just a guess. We don't know. So he was renowned as one of the legendary seven wise men. And to him is ascribed the introduction of mathematical and astronomical science into Greece. He is famous for predicting an eclipse which occurred in 585 BC. He thought that water is the original substance out of which all others are formed and that earth rests on water. And every particle, he said, is alive. And that matter and life are inseparable and one. So this is really coming close to Advaita Vedanta, which says that everything is conscious. There is nothing but the Atman. So Atman is conscious. So then we can just see how he's supposed to have looked like. You can see here. This is from a bust of. They were such wonderful sculptors, those Greeks. We will see later also that human form, the hair and all, how they depicted, unbelievable. I mean, so okay, then let us say goodbye to Greece and then come again to Vancouver. So I hope that you liked the discussion as much as I liked preparing for this, and many interesting things are yet to come. So we will see them slowly. So for now, let us end here. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Mastu